I'm going to talk a little bit about filing today, and this is, another step in the finishing of the surface of metal. And in your kits, you have a few different files. You have a pack of needle files, which are these like really small, smooth files, and you also have a medium file. And I threw some larger ones out here just to kind of show you the difference. And these files come in all different shapes and configurations and coarsenesses. And typically American files range from coarse, medium, and smooth. The European files are basically the same things. They just have kind of a different numbering order. They start with a 00, which is generally the coarsest cut, and then go to 0 and actually all the way up to 8. 8 being the smoothest. So for obvious reasons, a coarser file is going to remove more material. I actually put a big, this is called a bastard file, so I guess it's a big bastard. And the bastard is a coarse file, and that's a term for that cut. These files come in single cuts, they come in double cuts, and generally double cuts remove more metal and are a little bit more coarse. It's important to try to pick the best file for the job. And working small scale, these needle files do a really great job. But sometimes if we have some very, very fine detail in our metal, we need microfiles, which unfortunately are not in your kit, which are even smaller to get in those areas. But my goal here is to really just get you accustomed to using these tools and be able to do a lot with a little. So a lot of times I'll even use the jeweler's saw frame as a file if I'm trying to get into a real tight area. And an example of that is I have my pattern cut out. So this is the funky welder guy. But if I look at this really closely, and that, again, this is the problem with these GoPros, is I wish they would zoom just a little bit more. But if I look in this area here, right in the corner, and hopefully you can see that, there's some inconsistency with my sawing, and I don't have a file that's going to get in that tight. So what I can do is take my saw frame and loop the saw blade in this area, and I'll just show you real quick that I can go in and kind of clean this area up. But this kind of goes back to talking about sawing and having like a very gentle stroke with this and move slow, especially if I'm trying to clean up an area. But just by doing that, that little point looks a heck of a lot better. So that's kind of my first step. If I have an area that a file is not going to fit into, I really just try to do some light detailed filing with my saw. Now these files, they work pretty much the same way as the saw does. They have a tooth or a bunch of teeth that are basically angled away from the handle or the tang, which is this area, meaning that it only cuts in one direction, and that direction is away from me. So when I push away from me, that makes the cut. Rubbing back on the back and forth motion with your file, it's only cutting on the away stroke. So by pulling it back, it's really not accomplishing much. And this ends up being kind of a matter of preference. When I'm working with a large file, I just push the file, really gently and controlled, and then lift the file on the return stroke. And with non-ferrous metals like, copper, silver, it's not going to dull your file. But if you're filing something like steel and, you're just moving back and forth, it will cut, but that will also dull your file as well. And, I have a tendency to do this with non-ferrous metals, copper, moving back and forth. And especially if it's a small area that I can't fit the entire file into an area, and I'm just kind of using maybe the front point of that, I just seem to have more control. So again, it's kind of a personal preference. Your bench pins also, have a little notch in them, I believe. Mine, I actually cut a little notch in the corner, and this helps me give me a little support when I'm filing. So if I have an area that's like a little jagged here, I'm going to use my medium file or a little larger file, and I actually push that in that groove, and I'll set my file on top of this edge and just push away. And I don't know if you can see that, but you can actually see the areas that were hit with the file. They're actually a little shinier now. But, I just kind of push away from me and then look at what I'm doing. If I have areas that are not shiny, that means I have an inconsistent surface and it hasn't all been hit by the flat part of the file. But by having support, I have much more control over what I'm filing. And, again, copper is a very soft metal, so it's going to move, we're going to be able to remove material pretty quick. So you can kind of see how that's working. On the inside of this, I'm going to switch to a different file. And, the trick is trying to figure out the right configuration or shape of file to use. And the great thing about having, these small needle files, is there's a lot of different shapes. So if I need an area that's flat to get inside there, I can find a flat file. Let's see if I can get it out of here with my fingers. So like an area like this, and now my fingers are probably going to be in the way. Maybe I'll set it up this way and see if I can angle that a little bit so you can see it. And just kind of get some of that inconsistency, the highs and lows of my cut if it wasn't very accurate, and get that out of there. I really like files like this one that is kind of half round on the top and flat on the bottom. And the reason I like this is because it ends up with a really kind of sharp knife edge. And that allows me to get into some areas like this. And the other thing I do is, again, you have to really just practice and try to, figure out what works best for you. But, sometimes I will just even press down on my bench pin and use this negative space or this wedge that's cut out for space for my file. You always want to be careful that your finger isn't, right on top of that opening, because you're going to poke it. And here, like I was talking before, it's like this might be an area where I actually keep pressure on the metal on the backstroke. And again, it's not cutting on the backstroke, but it allows me to keep pressure on there and be a little bit more consistent with my cut of the file. Sometimes, in your kit, there's some round shaped files and there's some oval shaped files. I really like the oval ones, because I might find an area like this that, has a little bit more of a, curve a linear line in there, but I can kind of follow that curved line with pressure and smooth up those areas. The other thing too is, you know, since I cut this out on the back side, I'm going to have more burrs, you know, that little kind of sharp edge that was left by the saw. So the other thing that I can do is just take a file and actually kind of just, you know, angle this a little bit just to get that burr off of there. And it doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to be much. I can go very, very lightly just with the point of this file. And that seems to take that sharp edge off. And the thing, you know, especially if you're making jewelry, and I guess we haven't even decided if this is actually a jewelry piece. This is more of an exercise. But if it is a jewelry piece, the last thing that you want to do is, you know, sell a piece that has some sharp edge that's gonna, you know, that's gonna cut the person that's wearing it. So it's like those are really important considerations to make. But before we get to the next step of our project, I want to make sure that you just kind of go in there and clean up these areas. And with time, your expertise with the jeweler's saw frame, you know, or your skills, I should say, will increase. And the more accurate you are with the saw frame, the